Hello YouTube! And in this video we're going to be creating a chat application with WebSockets with Java and Spring Boot. This was actually requested by a viewer called Nicholas. So we're going to create this chat application that you see in front of you here. I've got two of them open. I should just note, one of the things that we're not going to cover in this tutorial is the static files, so the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript used in here. If you want that, go to the link in the description and you can download those files so you can follow along with this tutorial. The reason I'm not going to go over those things is because using vanilla JavaScript is something you probably would never really do for something like this. It was just a quick thing to bodge together for this tutorial. So let's just show you what we're going to make at the end of the tutorial. We are going to make this chat app. So if I type in my name here, enter the chat, we get this little chat client here. It says Shane connected. We can type a message there. So if we type a message, look at that, the message comes up. And you'll notice how snappy it is. And nothing's reloading. That's because we're using WebSockets. You can see here, so the message is there. The user gets a color that's designated based on their name. We also got a little avatar there that's just going to have their initial in there. Let's open the second one and just enter a new one. And you can see here instantly, as soon as Dave connected over here, it says Dave connected on this side. So we can also say hi there. And look at that. Dave has a separate color. He's got a blue. And it's pretty much instant. That's it working. And we're going to create the back end for this in this tutorial now. And like I say, if you want to follow along, go to the website in the description and you'll be able to download the static files that you're going to need for this tutorial. Okay, so now that little demo's out of the way, let's get started with actually creating the project. For this, you're going to want to go to start.spring.io so we can initialize our Spring project in a pretty consistent manner. This is really easy to do and you can do this wherever you are. So, set some settings up. We're going to be using Maven for this, Java, and Spring Boot. In my case, we're using 2.2.2, although you might be watching this in the future. In fact, you're definitely watching this in the future, so you might be using a different version. Or it might be the latest version, and so on and so forth. So let's create a group. The group is typically your domain backwards. So in this case, it's going to be co.uk, .codeyogi. And then we are going to just have an artifact ID. So in this case, we'll just say WebSockets tutorial. Then options, got the name there. Could say chat application with WebSockets. I'm going to be using Java 11 for this one. And we then need to add some dependencies. So the dependencies we need to add are WebSockets, like that, WebSocket, and also one called Lombok. Lombok just takes away some of the boilerplate code that you get in Java. You'll see when we get to it, it's going to be quite nice. So with that all set, all you need to do now is just click the generate button. It will download a zip file, unzip that folder, and then we're going to open that in your editor of choice. In this video, I'm going to be using IntelliJ. Okay, so by now you should have downloaded your Spring project from the Spring.io website and opened it in your editor of choice. Now in this case, I'm using Atom here only because IntelliJ wouldn't change the size of the XML font for some weird reason. So just have a look over your POM file. POM stands for Project Object Model. It is used with Maven so you can build and configure your project. So in this case, we just want to make sure that we actually have the right dependencies. So we have the WebSockets dependencies with Spring Boot. We have the Spring Framework starter test dependency that has an exclusion of JUnit because they can cause problems, although we won't be writing any tests in this tutorial. Just something to be aware of there. And also we want to make sure we have the Spring Boot Maven plugin. If you have all those and it looks pretty similar to what I've got here, your version may vary because obviously you're in the future. Okay, so one thing I've already gone ahead and done is in the resources folder. So if you go source, main, resources, I have created a static folder that has all of our static files, which you can download from the link in the description. So that's just your CSS, your JavaScript and index files that are going to create the front end of the application that we're not really going to worry too much about in this tutorial. If you've done that, great, we can get started with actually operating on the back end. Okay, so now we've got all the setup out of the way, it's time to actually get down to doing some coding. So in your source main Java file and then your WebSockets tutorial folder or whatever you've called the project, create a new package and call it web. And I did not create a new package there. New package, we'll call it web. And then we'll create a new Java class and we're going to call it WebSockets message config. Okay, so as you might guess, this class is going to be a configuration class. So we're going to add the very first annotation, configuration. That's a Spring annotation that literally says this is a Spring configuration class, as you may have guessed. The next one is enable WebSocket message broker. That's another annotation we need to use here. And then we're going to implement WebSocket message broker configurer. We're going to implement that interface. So all we're going to have in this file now is two methods. Two methods is all we're going to have. Override. They're both overridden methods that are present here. So let's get started. The first one is the registering of the stomp endpoints, of which we're going to have one. So we'll say public void register stomp endpoints. Say final. I'm going to pass in a stomp endpoint registry. Okay, like that. And what we do is we say registry, add endpoint, and we're going to give it an endpoint, so /chat-example in this case. We also need to say with sock.js. Now what that's going to do is that's to do with our front end we're using. This with sock.js method also has a fallback for browsers that don't support WebSockets. And what sock.js is sock.js is a browser JavaScript library that essentially provides a WebSocket-like object. It does actually use WebSockets as well. Like I say, we're not going to focus too much on the front end here. This is just what we need to do for the back end here. So let's create the next method, because look how easy that method was. Next one, also, again, overriding from the interface, say public void, and now we're going to configure the message broker. So we're going to say configure message broker, say final message broker registry, and again, we'll just say a registry like that. And what we need to do here is we need to do two things. We need to set the prefix for the application. So registry set application destination prefixes. In this case, we're going to say app. That's a pretty common thing to have as our prefix. So this is what's going to be behind all of our message mapping annotations. You'll see that when we get round to it. So registry again, and this time we're going to enable a simple message broker, and we're going to, the typical thing you do is you sort of say topic. That's one of the things that you see quite a lot online, and this is just going to enable a simple memory-based message broker to carry the messages that we have, the chat messages we have, back to the client, and it's going to be all prefixed with this topic thing here. So great, we've got our configuration sorted. Now let's move on to the model. So for that, let's create a new package in our WebSocket tutorial folder. We're going to say, we'll call it model. And in here we're going to have two files. We're going to have an enum class, and we are also just going to have our simple message. We'll call it message. So the message one you're going to love because we're going to be using Lombok, and it's going to look really, really clean because there's going to be nothing in there because Lombok's going to take care of most of the boilerplate stuff for us. You're going to love it. So for this first one, we're going to call it message type, and it's going to be an enum. So we want to click on, we'll type in message type, and then we'll click on enum, press enter, and let's just create an enum. So for this, all we want to do is we want to have a couple of enums that describe the type of message that we're going to have. So one of them is going to be a chat message. One of them is going to be one that connected, one that says that someone's connected, and the other one's going to be one when someone disconnects. So if you remember from the example we looked at earlier, it said Shane joined when the user logged in. That's what's going to be related to the connect. I don't think we showed you the disconnect, but essentially if someone disconnects, it was going to say so-and-so left the conversation, and normal messages will just be chat. So we have the ability to sort of change things as we go along. Great. So now we are going to create a new Java class, and we'll just call it, what should we call it? Chat message or just message? Yeah, chat message probably better. So we'll call it chat message. And all we're going to define here is just what a chat message is. So we're going to have a few things. We're going to have a message type. So that's that enum we just created. Message type, we'll call that type. We're going to have some content. That's going to be the message. Or we could call it message, but that might be a bit confusing. So we'll just say content. We're also going to have a sender. So who sent the message. And we're also going to have a time. Now, I'm using a string for the time, and that's because in the front end, when the message is created, it uses something called moment.js to create a timestamp, but we're just going to turn it straight away into a string just because it's easier to process that way. We're not actually doing any manipulation of dates or anything, so we're literally just going to treat it as a string because all it's going to do is say so-and-so, the message it was at this time, or so on and so forth. So, this looks like a bit of a bare class. Well, we're missing a couple of things. We don't have a constructor. We don't need one. We're going to be using a builder, so a builder pattern. So we're going to say @builder, and that's going to be using Lombok, so we can create a builder pattern. If you don't know what a builder is a design pattern that enables us to create an object with optional parameters. You'll see what we mean when we get to this. Actually using these this object later on. If you don't know what it is, you have a look on the internet. There's some quite good tutorials that are going to explain it far better than I will. Also, one of the things we need to do is we need to have some getter methods. Well, Lombok's got us covered for that as well. We can just say @getter, and look at that, brilliant. We get all our getters built in. So Lombok operates on the bytecode of Java, so we don't actually see anything happen here. But IntelliJ is intelligent enough so that it will actually know that we're using the getters. So it will actually provide us with that autofill capability. It's really, really good. So hopefully you're becoming converts to Lombok from watching this video. So next we're going to go ahead and create the controller, and as before we're going to create a new package in our WebSocket tutorial package, and we're going to call it controller. Now this is going to have two classes. The first one is going to be the chat controller, so let's go and do that now. Notice I said the chat controller, not the fat controller from Thomas the Tank Engine. Okay, chat controller, what do we need to do? Well, we need to first say that this is a controller, so we have the controller annotation up there that tells Spring, look, this is a controller, brilliant. Next we need to do the message mapping, so we're going to have the first thing we're going to have is a send message method. Try and say that too many times. And we're going to have a message mapping for that as chat.send, like this. And then we're also going to have send to, and this is where we invoke all the stuff that we were doing earlier. So some of this might look familiar to you now. We've got our message mapping, and let's say next we're going to create the message, the method send message, and it's going to return a chat message, and the payload, because this is going to be coming from the front end, is going to be a chat message like that. And all we're going to do in this case is we're just going to return the chat message. Really nice. Not the actual that. I've made an error. Good IntelliJ catching that there. And next, all we need to do is we need to say, okay, what happens when we have a new user? So when someone joins the chat, what's going to happen? Well, we need a message mapping for that again. And in this case, we're going to say /chat.newUser. And we're going to send this one to, again, topic.public. So let's just copy and paste that one. Also going to return a chat message for this one. This time we are going to say new user. And the payload again is going to be a chat message like that, but we're also going to have a simple message accessor, so it's going to convert things for us like this. There we go. Okay, so now we need to add the user to the WebSocket session, and this is what this header accessor does. So get session attributes, and then we're going to put in here username. So that's the key, and we're going to say chat message get sender like that. So if we actually look in here, you'll see this is a map of strings by objects. So objects by strings. Yeah, if we look in here, so it's mapped strings by objects, or the other way around. You can see what the code says. I'm saying it really weird for some reason, but that's what that's going to be. So that's going to allow us to actually sort of get hold of the users, make sure every user gets registered correctly, and then we're going to return the chat message so that we can say so and so has joined. Brilliant. So create the chat controller. The next thing we need to do is create a event listener for the WebSockets. So let's go ahead and create the event listener. So we need to say Java class, say WebSocket event listener, and this is going to be in that controller package. And so this one's going to be a Spring component, so we can do some auto wiring of some stuff. And all we're going to do in this class really is we're going to handle what happens. We listen for events such as a user connecting and a user disconnecting. Because this is just a tutorial, in the first method where a user connects, we're not actually going to do anything. We're just going to sort of say, look, a user's connected. And then when a user disconnects, we're actually going to just send a message saying so-and-so is disconnected, so it will show up on the UI. And for that, we're going to need this thing called simple message sending operations, and we're going to auto wire that in. So let's go ahead and do that. But first, let's create that event listener for when a user connects. So when a user connects, we're going to say public void handle WebSocket connect listener like that, and we'll say final session, and then we want to say connected event like that. So get like a little event. And in this case, we're actually not going to use that event. All we're going to say is, we should actually have a logger. Let's create a logger. So we say private static final logger import. Whoops. Import that. Yes, that one. I'm going to say equals logger factory. And we'll say get logger, and then we'll pass in our class name. WebSocket event listener dot class. So now I've got a logger we can use, and we can just say logger dot info, and we'll pass in a message, and we'll say something like bing bong bing, we have a new cheeky little I've spelled that wrong, cheeky little connection. Right, now let's create our disconnect listener. For this, we're actually going to want to auto wire. What are we going to auto wire? We're going to auto wire that message sending operations object. So we're going to say privyet. No, I meant private. This one, and we'll just call it sending operations like this. And let's create the new event listener for when a user disconnects. We'll say public void handle WebSocket disconnect listener, and we'll say final session disconnect event. We'll pass an event like this. There we go. We need a header accessor object again, so stomp header accessor like this, and we're going to wrap our message using this thing here. So say wrap, get the event, and we'll say get message from the event, like that. Okay, now we need to get the username of the user that's disconnected. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to say final string username, because obviously that's what a username is. Then what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to put a cast in for a string, and we're going to say header accessor dot get session attribute with an S on the end dot get, and then we're going to get a username. So that may seem familiar to you, and the reason it should do is because earlier we created the map where we put the username in. This time we're pulling the username out. Why do we have to cast to a string? Well, the reason we have to cast to a string is because, as I mentioned earlier, this actually is a map of objects by strings, which means that when it gets returned, we need to take this string, the string which is actually an object, or the compiler thinks it's an object, and we need to cast it to a string, because we know the username is a string, but we actually don't know it's a string in terms of Java land. So that's why we're casting that to a string, in case anyone was wondering. Next, let's create a chat message. We'll say chat message like that. We'll say, instead of saying new, we're going to say chat message dot builder, because remember we didn't actually provide a constructor, so it's just going to be the default constructor. We're going to say builder dot type, and we're going to pass in a message type, which in this case is going to be a disconnect, because obviously we're disconnecting. And then we'll say dot sender, and that's going to be equal to the username, like that. And then we're going to just say call the build method on that builder object to return our chat message. And the final thing we need to do in this little method is we need to say sending operations, and we just need to convert and send that to the topic public area, like that, and we want to pass in that chat message there. Okay, brilliant. One more thing, if we go to our application properties, so that's application.properties, you might want to set a server port. The reason for this is that sometimes you'll get port clashes. So Spring defaults to 8080, I think, port 8080. For some reason it always clashes on my machine, so you can just say server.port equals, and then pass in the port number you want to do. So now we should actually be able to run this correctly. So if we go to our main file here, the Spring Boot application file, we should actually be able to run this and see what happens in the web browser. Okay, moment of truth, let's click run. And we can see that the Spring context is starting to load, and it's loaded successfully, and we can see that we are on port 8090, or at least I am. You might be on a different port, depending on what you set, or if you've even set anything in the application properties. So let's go to the web browser. We can reload the page. We're on localhost 8090, like I say. So what's going to happen here, we can see that the front end's loaded correctly. If we type in a username, what we're expecting to see down in the console over here is we're going to see a couple of messages, then the final one should say something like bing bong bing, user connected. So we'll do that now, we'll connect. Excellent, we've got a cheeky little new connection. We're going to duplicate the tab, and we'll have another person connect, like that. Great, we've got another little connection. What happens this time if a user disconnects? User disconnects, nothing happens down here as we expected. However, what we have got is that message back to the client that says that the user has left. So, hopefully that's been an interesting and helpful tutorial. If you want to see more things like this, there are two things you can do. First thing, you could subscribe to the YouTube channel. Second thing, you could subscribe to the email list, which is linked in the description. The reason you might want to do that is because you can guarantee that you'll get the emails with the videos that you want to watch sent to you, and it won't be reliant on some algorithm that decides maybe you don't want to watch these videos. I'll also send you articles about interesting little things I found on the internet. So thank you very much for watching. Any questions, any comments, leave them down below. I'll try and answer them all as usual. Thank you very much.